as far as employment is concerned, you know, I'm starting to get a little, I'm a lot more than concerned. I'm starting to lose hope almost.
Welcome to another episode of the Express Economist. Let's continue our discussion with Professor Pranab Sen. We were discussing the budget, and let's carry on where we left off last episode. Now turn to the bits that this budget didn't do, and it was quite stark in the way it sort of was presented. The capital expenditure push was sort of seen the highlight, and then for most part, it just it went past very quickly, and thankfully the speech was also quite short, which was a relief. But let's focus on what the budget didn't do. A lot of people have talked about the massive stress in the economy, different sections, and the argument has been that the budget ignored a lot of people, a lot of sections. Now, can you just tell me how you saw what the budget didn't do?
Well, you know, it's not so much what the budget didn't do, because what I think is the biggest problem with this budget is actually a sin of omission. It's not didn't do. So in order to provide for this capex that we've been discussing, what the government has done is that it has effectively cut its revenue expenditure. Once you take out the committed expenditures of interest payments, salaries, and pensions, deduct those, what you're left with revenue expenditure is actually in current rupee terms lower. So you're actually cutting. In real terms, it's vastly lower. Now, in that category, there are a lot of activities which are just as important as investment, perhaps even more so. And to give you one example, it's ICDS. ICDS has been cut in absolute terms. In a situation where the government itself was talking about early childhood education and integrating the early childhood education at the Anganwadi level. That would have required more resources. You would have required more staff in the Anganwadi centers. You've gone in exactly the opposite direction. Now, that may not create a short-run problem, but it certainly creates a massive long-run problem, because there is going to be a cohort of children who would not get what they deserve. And to me, that's a deeply worrying problem.
So I just wanted to ask you to expand on this, because, you know, and this is not just about this budget. I think it's a story for several budgets, that the argument always has been that for a country with as many number of poor people, possibly the most in the world, and as many number of malnourished kids and malnourished adolescents, and even worse within the girl child, that number, that the budget expenditures are both as a percentage of GDP and in absolute amount so dramatically low, either on health, education, all of these basic metrics. First of all, and this is happening once the pandemic has come and gone. So last year, I remember in the budget estimates, the health expenditure was cut by 10%. The revised estimates show that the health expenditure went up because the second wave happened. And
no, and that was entirely because of the vaccine purchase.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, but it's quite remarkable that we've held back on health and education spends to the extent that we have, and health in particular with the pandemic. So what are the long-term or even short or medium-term impacts of these omissions that you're talking about?
You know, the short-term impact of these omissions is probably pretty small, okay? Uh, the problem are the longer term issues, because what has happened is you've cut back on ICTS, you've cut back on education, you've cut back on health expenditures. All of these have suffered uh, cutbacks. None of these have immediate short run consequences. Their consequences are medium to long run. But the point is that, especially for children, sometimes the damage that is done in the short term is irreversible. So there is, I think, an issue of the degree to which you take guardianship of the generations that are there.
Right. I want to also ask you about the whole farm distress issue. Oddly enough, 2022 was the year when farmers' income was supposed to get doubled. And there was no mention of either that target even not being achieved, or any recognition of that target ever being spoken. Whereas we've sort of looked ahead even further, 25 years ahead. And I just wanted to understand, how do you sort of see India's farmer distress, even if it's not farm distress that, productivity goes up or production numbers keep going up, but farmers are definitely distressed. How significant is that, the farmers being distressed? Because, and we've also seen, we've talked about this in the past, that the number of people going back into agriculture has started going up, and which is quite a remarkably alarming trend. How do you see that panning out?
I think the two are linked. The simple fact of the matter is that over the years, as farm sizes have fragmented, the share of agriculture in the average farm household income, annual income, has been shrinking, and non-farm activities have been growing. We are at a situation where they're almost at par. So farmer distress and farm distress, I think, now are two very different things. Because as far as farmer distress is concerned, if they're unable to get work in the slack periods, then you're going to have farmers distress without necessarily there being farm distress. Okay. It's still not clear how it is playing out in terms of the overall distress that we are witnessing. But if you look really at the data that we have, it's quite surprising, because the last 4 years, we've had very, very good harvests. Okay. And prices have not fallen dramatically. There's been some fall in price, but prices have gone up and down, but they haven't fallen dramatically. There have been other periods earlier where farm distress was very evident, but this is not that kind of a situation at the moment. So I'm a little at a loss to understand what can be done about this problem.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, you were saying something.
No, so when we're talking about the farmer distress, that is a different thing, and that's something we need to consider, because what it is saying in effect is that the kind of ancillary activities that farmers used to do, those seem to have dried up. And that's a part of the whole MSME informal sector stress that we've already been talking about.
Okay. Now, before I come to the last question on the larger economic philosophy, or if there is any trend emerging from Prime Minister Modi's tenure, now 8-9 years into his tenure, I want to ask you about the unemployment issue. Now, we've talked in the past, and you very articulately explained how India needs labor-intensive work, and informal is where there's a fantastic line that you said, that there's a very sharp trade-off between informal and employment and formalization when it comes to employment in India. If you reduce informalization and make it more formal, employment gets hurt very sharply. Now, given the realities that we have, given the uproar that we see on the streets, and now with this strategy, which on the face of it, the government seems to be addressing that this will now create jobs and solve all problems in the next 1, 2, 3 years, whatever. Given all these, how do you see that panning out? Unemployment situation, what do you sort of see ahead?
As of now, I am not very sanguine, because the impression I get is that almost everything that has been done has essentially been to push investments, even if they are capital intensive kinds of investment. So you may well get a situation where the larger of the MSMEs may start investing, but they may be investing in labor displacing technologies, which doesn't help us very much as far as the employment issue is concerned. And there's a fundamental problem which we really haven't addressed, and I think there's an international dimension to it, and that is on the structure of our interest rates. Today, the difference between the interest rate on working capital and the interest rate on a 10-year loan is substantively not very different. So what you're doing in effect is you're encouraging capital intensive production. Traditionally, we have always believed that there should be 3 percentage point difference between a working capital loan and a 10-year loan. Now it's 0.5%. Okay. So even on our interest rate strategy, and by the interest rate strategy is completely controlled by the government, we have been actively encouraging capital intensive modes of production. So as far as employment is concerned, I'm starting to get a little, I'm a lot more than concerned. I'm starting to lose hope almost.
Is there any other international example? I mean, we have China at our borders. We know of other countries that might have gone through similar phases where they needed to deal with unemployment and labor intensive. Is there any international example and international episode that we can learn from?
Well, I suppose you can. I mean, the two countries which immediately spring to mind, the first is Bangladesh, who are also a country with very, very high population density like us, in fact, higher than us. But they seem to have managed it a lot better than we have. And the other is Vietnam.
And
unemployment.
And were their strategies remarkably different from what India has been trying to do?
Yes.
In what sense? Any understanding you can give us on that?
Yes. In the Indian case, for the manufacturing sector, there are so many roadblocks. I mean, we've been talking about ease of doing business for forever, right? But when you talk with industrialists, particularly the small and medium ones, they say that there's no discernible difference on the ground. It seems to have become embedded in our institutional operations. This is not the case either in Bangladesh or Vietnam. Sure, they have corruption there as well. I mean, but that's not the point. The kind of institutional rigidities that we have introduced are really quite significant.
Right. Okay. So we'll bring this to a close, but there is this massive question that everybody wants to know. What is the economic philosophy of Prime Minister Modi? Because he came to power with a lot of promise about right of center economics, and there was a fair amount of things said about how the previous government under Congress and even with left's combination was doing politics of dole. And but we've seen in the last 8-9 years under Mr. Modi also, there have been a lot of flip-flops, a lot of back and forth. There was a land acquisition, an ordinance to remove the land acquisition bill act, and then that was taken back. We've seen with farm loan waivers. He used to criticize it and has now in 2017, I think he started pushing for it before the UP election. We've seen with farm laws going back and forth. In 2019-20, we had the whole episode of corporate tax cut, which didn't really result in anything. And now we have the government investment-led strategy. So just from observing it from some distance, as a reporter, you just find so many different strands to what he's been doing, from PM Kisan dole payments to farmers, to even having a committee which said that let's wrap up FCI, Food Corporation of India. So how do you sort of see, is there any pattern emerging about what Mr. Modi's economic philosophy, the Modinomics or whatever it is there any consistent thinking here, or is there a pattern emerging?
No, I think it's a sort of what should I say, groping towards a pattern. So if I look at the post-2014 period, there have been a lot of experiments and a lot of flip-flops. But the one thing which of late seems to have become entrenched, and that is worrying, is this greater tendency for protectionism. So again, this seems to take us back to the old Nehruvian thing, is that protect domestic, and so the old infant industry argument that unless you give protection, the industry will not grow. We seem to have gone back to that.
Even
that's the only
PLI,
consistency that I can see.
Even the PLI scheme, is that a throwback, or is this different from?
Yes, it is a throwback.
But the government keeps saying that it's very different from the socialist mentality, and PLI is different.
No, I mean, the government has forgotten what Mrs. Gandhi did during the period 69 to 72. And it would be instructive if they looked it up.
Right. So thanks a lot, Professor Sen. This has been a very productive session. I hope the viewers got to understand what the budget was trying to do, where it might have missed a trick, what segments of the society may not be benefiting, what segments might be benefiting, and what, if at all, is the economic philosophy under which Prime Minister Modi has been pushing the budget. Thanks a lot for watching The Express Economist. We'll see you soon. Thank you.